Fish Natural. Welcome to our Fish Natural seminar series. Today we're going to do a little bit of talking about fishing the spawn. While we're on, if you would, please keep yourself muted. If you have questions, put them over inside the chat. We'll get to them as we can. We're going to do a little bit of talking about three target species today when we're talking about fishing the spawn. First species we're going to talk about is going to be white bass. Then we're going to talk a little bit about crappie. And we're going to talk about the black bass family and what to look for as far as when to catch them best, which is while they're spawning, while they're trying to reproduce. We all know then that they'll be up on their beds and easier to locate. You catch one, you can catch a few more right there in that same area. So we're going to get straight on into introductions. My name is Bo Davidson. I work for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. I am the coordinator for the Fishing in the Natural State program. Right now at present, that's the biggest tie I have to fishing, is the fact that I help teach fishing to others. But it is a hobby of mine as well, and in years past growing up, it was a way I helped feed the family. I grew up a little bit behind the times, and fishing was sustenance for us at that time. So that's me, and that's my tie to fishing. Will, what about you?
I'm Will Hafner. I'm the facility manager for the Potlatch Cooks Lake Nature Center in Casco, just east of Stuttgart. As being a nature center, we teach all sorts of classes, and one of them that I always hit home on is fishing. I grew up in a fishing family. Been fishing as far as I know my whole life. I fished for fun. I fished tournaments, especially back in college. I fished a lot of bass tournaments. I did a little bit after college as well, and now I just fish to get away. I fish to feed my family, and fish to be able to teach other people how to fish. It's just one of the things I enjoy to do really year round.
Matt, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Matt Cordell. I'm an agronomist with Nutrient Ag Solutions, so no ties other than friendships with and buying fishing license and hunting license with AGFC, but guess I'm just friends with the wrong folks and got voluntold to help out on a call, and not an expert in the subject matter, but I love fishing. I've been doing it as long as I can remember and enjoy it, and hopefully we can figure some stuff out here together.
All right, start getting to the meat of it. When we're talking about people or about fish spawning and going and doing their reproductive portion of it, the spawn is whenever these fish are starting to move in, bed up, and start laying their eggs, the males fertilizing the eggs and such. And the first ones to do that's going to usually be the white bass. I mean, we're talking about around the time the water temperature hits about 50 degrees, you'll see them start coming in. When those buds are starting to hit on some of these trees out through there, whether it be the dogwood, the Bradford pears and such, they're really getting into the spawn at that time. Places to go find these white bass, I'm going to be looking for areas to where lakes and stuff run into the streams. They have a tendency to migrate, if you would, and they'll go up into the shallower waters along those riverbeds and streams. There on the Arkansas River, if I'm fishing it, I'm going to get just below a dam somewhere where they're trying to migrate up that river. Same way over in southwest Arkansas, if I'm over around Millwood, I want to get over around the dam where Little River is flowing out of Millwood Lake. Ricky, if you would mute yourself, please. Thank you. Here in Central Arkansas, one of my favorite places to go is going to be the Maumelle River, right there where it's flowing in. The white bass will get up inside those rocky shoals there. When you're catching them deep into going into their spawn, you can find them there in the thousands up around those rocky shoals up through there. Locating them is really not hard. It's just a short period of the year whenever they're doing that for the white bass. The biggest thing is getting them to bite, because 9 times out of 10, what they're concentrating on is getting to that location that they think is prime so they can lay their eggs and hatch out their young. The biggest baits that I've used, when it comes to white bass fishing, you don't have to get a whole lot. A lightweight spinning rod or spin cast rod, get out there with about an 1/8 ounce jig head, put you on about 2.5 to 3 inch curly tail grub. White is one of my favorite colors when it comes to the white bass, but chartreuse works as well, and some of those other mixed colors will work real great as well. You can fish it with a spinner blade, you can fish it without a spinner blade, and all that right there just brings in, you combine all that with the time, water temperature, the bait, finding them on location, and you can have yourself a blast and get a hefty meal real quick catching white bass. Now, I know a lot of people prefer not to eat white bass. I can tell you from personal experience, they do have a little bit of red meat down the sides. You trim that out a little bit, and it's going to be hard to tell the difference between it and crappie a lot of times. Matt, you want to do a little talking about the crappie?
Yeah, just a little bit. I'll second you on that white bass, though. In college at Fayetteville, we ate many of them, and once we figured out that the old red stripe there, it's pretty good stuff. Yeah, I guess crappie, it's about time there. Again, I always kind of look for the dogwoods too, but water temperature getting warming up, I've been going every chance I get, and it's some days it'll be about to the 60s, but not quite, more in those mid 50s. So and that's in some of the shallower stuff. Some of the stain stuff's going to get warmer faster. Things on the north edge a lot of times because it's blocked from the wind, because the wind out of the north is usually colder. So a lot of times if you can get in a pocket, toward that side of the lake, those will warm up faster. Darker water is going to warm up faster than the clear stuff, but just be looking for those. Here lately, I don't think we still are a little ways out. Some spots, I had one guy tell me in the reservoir he caught some in 8 inches of water this weekend, but the same body of water they were catching about 20 foot away from the bank around some structure. So I think they're trying to decide what they're doing right now, but be looking for that. I'm surprised how many of them are just kind of out by their lonesome right now, fishing. It's a dirty word with lots of folks, but looking at live scope and going out and actually seeing where the fish are, I'm surprised. I've learned a lot. I learned how they'll get on the bottom. I didn't think that crappie, always think about catfish or something, but they like it on the bottom down there as well, especially when it's cooler. And just seeing singles by themselves a lot of times is what we're catching, and not seeing a bunch of them schooled up around brush and things like that. But I'm in a pretty shallow lake as well, so I think in some of your deeper water, I don't fish those a whole lot, mostly oxbows for me, but I think some of your deeper water, you'll see them schooled up right now around some of that structure. But I guess you said about 65 is when they really get to spawning and doing, getting into that, but they will between now and then be moving toward those ways. So I look for those bigger lakes, those creek channels, and the things that are leading to more shallow water, and any kind of, with the water going up and down in temperature, any kind of variation in elevation. So the electronics and stuff do help as far as, kind of finding where to go there. They're hungry now, so they're pretty aggressive, and, look for shad and things like that, or even birds. You don't have to have electronics, to find some bait, see it schooling up and things like that.
And you're right, Matt, on a lot of that stuff. When I'm thinking crappie fishing and I'm getting out there, what I'm looking for on visual cues is, like I was saying, I'm looking for those buds on those trees whenever the white bass starts schooling up. About the time the blossoms actually hit, about the time crappie really starts coming in good on that visual cue like that. And then as far as them staging, yes, getting them out there, catching them out on the ledge as that water's warming up and then moving with that water temperature, looking to get up there on that shallower end of it to spawn. That's catching them pre-spawn. That's also a fun time because they're still feeding pretty heavy at that time.
and we think about them, being around tops and grass and different things like that, rocks. But, for the most part, I think, the males get up and fan and make the beds, and the females come in and lay the beds. And from what I've seen and read, they like just about everything unless it's real silty and the eggs will kind of sink, and, or something like that. But if it's even hard mud or clay or sand or any of those other things, they'll spawn on just about anything. And I think it's important to remember wherever you're fishing, they're going to spawn on what they got to spawn on. So it doesn't have to be you're looking for this or that. I fished a lot of reservoirs where there's nothing but mud bank around the edge and not much structure to speak of, and that's where they're going to be. They're still, a lot of times on those reservoirs, it seems like they're in the corners of those more often than along the sides. So might be a spot to try.
You're right. Crappie are prolific reproducers. That's why we suggest to a lot of people not to put them inside their ponds or what have you, their farm ponds, because they will have a tendency to over reproduce for that body of water, and you'll wind up with a bunch of mature, real small, stunted crappie in there, and they compete for the food sources the same as the bass and the bluegill and so forth. What's your favorite bait to use?
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I've kind of, my dad got into it before me, and I've got into tying my own, but I've used a ton of the Bobby Garland, and just, there's been many crappie caught on no name black and chartreuse and blue and white tube jigs in the past. So you don't have to get too fancy, but I did have a couple here I've tied myself that, it's kind of hard to get it in there, but I like to use these rubber legs and maybe some different bucktail or different feathers, but mixing up a couple of different kinds of material for the tails to give it kind of different profile and different action. When it's tough, or a lot of times when I first start going out in the year, I'll tip it with a minnow a lot of time, like a number 4, a real small one, just to give it a little scent. But I think they're good with minnows. They're good without them. It just depends on the day a lot of times. But I always like to have them with me just in case. Some days you just pitch it all and just go straight minnow and a hook and put it out there if you have to. But I like to have them with me. But when they're biting good, jigs, seem to work. And since I have started playing with the live scope a little bit, you'll get one that bites and hits good on a jig, and then I've changed totally different color pattern altogether just to see what happens. And if they're hungry, they eat them too. So I always give folks a hard time, say, does it work good because do you use it because it works good, or does it work good because that's when you use them? And so, somebody can go out with a whole different setup, different color, and catch just as many as I can or more. And it's just being in the right spot at the right time a lot of times.
And the right presentation as well. I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, as you're out there fishing. Relatively small action up above the water with the tip of your rod is a big action down below. It gets exaggerated down there where that jig's at. So a simple trying to hold it still a lot of times will cause that thing to twitch if you're straight line jigging it. If you're operating with a bobber, a slip bobber, or a peg bobber, that wave action will cause that jig to move a little bit as well. And it'll be near the point of extreme depending upon how much of wave action you're getting on top of that water. No different than what these white bass. I mean, if I'm casting out there in that moving water for white bass and I'm using a spinner blade on that 3-inch long curly tail grub, I'm not going to give it much action except maybe just a pause and retrieve every now and then, just to give it a little bit of fall to where it makes it look injured. Matt, you like to use a bobber on yours? You straight lining?
I'm mostly straight lining now, but in the past when I've been around some reservoirs and it's super shallow, I've done real well with the bobbers well. And usually when I'm thinking the spawn, we're usually fishing more shallow water, so I don't even mess with a slip bobber most of the time. I'll just put it a foot or two wherever we're at and just lock it in place. But when if I was having to cast a little farther, or there are times when the fish are kind of spooky out in the boat and over a top, and then you need a bobber to kind of cast at them to stay at that right depth. I'll use one of those slip bobber situation, and I use them on on my live scope, and I kind of peg a bullet weight up above it because it's just easier to see, and I just use those little bitty rubber bobber stops, and they work. You can't hardly even see it. There, you kind of put it against my face, there you can kind of see that little bitty rubber stop. They're super cheap, and you can. I think I got like 1,200 of them on Amazon for $10 or something. So if you need some, let me know because I got plenty. But I will use a bobber sometimes, but here lately it's been more just catching them. And you're right about the twitching and getting a lot of action, but most of mine are on the fall, or it's that bait's passing by the fish, and they're coming after it. Well, I'm using bigger jigs too, 1/8 ounce, and then pretty good profile. But right now they're hungry. When you get them and they're biting slow, a lot of times you downsize. But maybe a 16th or even smaller. But I like an 1/8 all the way around most of the time.
That's the thing to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. If any of you are new or newer to fishing, the fish's anatomy will dictate where they'll go for their feed as well. And with all these three target species we're talking about, their eyes are mainly, although they're located to the forward side of their head, they're up high on their head. Their jaws are turned up a little bit. They do not go down for food most of the time. They'll come up for their food. It's that way whether it's the white bass, the crappie, or the black bass family. And speaking of black bass, Will, what is the secret to finding a black bass on the spawn?
Be where they want to be.
Yeah.
A lot of times, so we are talking about black bass, which are going to be your largemouth, your smallmouth, and your spotted bass. Typically, though, we mainly think about largemouth, and that's what I'm going to talk most about. If you are up in northern Arkansas where you have smallmouth bass, they will spawn earlier with cooler water temps than your largemouth. You're looking around 48 to 55 degrees. The smallmouth will start spawning. Largemouth, 55, 65, more around that 65 range. Right now, we're in pre-spawn for all the black bass species. We're getting close. I fished a large core reservoir yesterday in north central Arkansas, and we're already hitting 55 degrees. The fish are staging. They're in what, like I said, we call pre-spawn, which is a great time to fish. Right now, those fish are grouping up. They're stacking up, and you can, when you find them, you're going to find a pretty good wad of them. But then they're going to spawn, and when they spawn, they're going to move shallower. That's why we like to fish the spawn a lot of times. It makes accessing fish so much easier. When they're in pre-spawn, winter patterns, different times of the year like that, when it's really hot, really cold, they get away from the bank, and it makes it a lot more difficult for bank anglers to catch a mess of fish. And that's what's so awesome about the spawn for all these species we're talking about, is it creates a great fishing time for bank anglers. And I know we have a lot of bank anglers in the state for many different reasons, but that's what's awesome about the spawn, is it brings the fish to you. So what I'm going to look for, like I said, I'm talking largemouth mainly, shallow water. I like clear water. And when they're spawning, and I'm talking the actual spawn, they're locked onto beds. They are guarding the bed because they've either already laid their eggs or about to lay their eggs. You're going to have typically a male and a female bass guarding that nest, and you can see them. If you're in shallow, clear water, talking 2 to 3 foot or less, you can actually see these beds, and we'll do what we call sight fishing, where you pick out a fish and you're actually casting to that one fish and trying to catch them. I'm going to look for areas that are flat, but I'm also going to look for cover. So let's say, let's just talk bank fishing for right now. You're walking the edge of a pond or a reservoir or even a lake, because I've done this on Lake Dardanelle when I was going to college. That's what was really cool. I'd get around like the strip pits and some of the other areas where you could see those fish, and I would look for a stump or a down tree or lily pad stems, just some kind of cover. You don't want to be in an area where there's a ton of cover, because it's going to be harder to pinpoint where those fish are. But if you're in a wide open spot, there's not much cover, those fish are going to spawn right next to that stick or right next to those pad stems or vegetation. And let's say we are sight fishing and you see that fish, I'm going to try to go with as light of line as possible, but still for bass, I'm still going to go 12 to 15 pound line a lot of times. But if they get really spooky, I will get a spinning rod out and break down to 4 and 6 pound line, even for these 4 to 6 pound fish. But I'm a jig man through and through. I'm going to throw a 5/16 ounce jig 90% of the time, year round, but especially during the spawn because it looks like a crawfish. You're going to flip it in there to the middle of this saucer, and that's the bed. You want it to look like it is a crawfish attacking the eggs. When they're actually spawning and they're on the beds, they're not as worried about eating. They're actually protecting the nest. So it doesn't matter a whole lot color-wise what you throw at them. I like to go natural if I can see it. Go with like a green pumpkin color. This time of year, pre-spawn, a lot of black and blue. And then I like to get outside the box a little bit. I like to throw a 1/2 ounce black and red jig with a crawfish trailer. But you want to make it look like it's attacking those eggs. And it may take the first cast in there, and that fish, you're going to see its reaction. If you need to see it really well, even throw something just completely white, a white tube, a white lizard, a white worm, something you can see, because once again, they're not going for natural. They're going for, oh, that's something trying to get my eggs. I'm going to protect that. And you just want to keep it in there, kind of wiggle it around and watch that fish. And over time, you'll see its reactions. And when its gills flare, you better get ready because it is about to hit your bait. A lot of times, though, they're not going to hit hard. You're going to see them suck that bait in, and they're just going to swim off. And that's when you're going to want to set the hook. Sight fishing for bass can be a lot of fun, and it can be very frustrating as well. I remember in college, I found one on a bed, and I fished for it for about 30 minutes through I don't know how many different things at it. I left, went to the bait shop, bought some new baits, came back and worked on it again for about another 30 minutes before I ended up catching it. And it was about a 7-pounder. But I mean, it's just one of those deals that it takes a lot of time to catch them. I like pre-spawn, I like post-spawn too, but right now they're getting shallow, they're getting there. Some other baits I like, if you want to cover water and don't know exactly where the fish are, once you're starting to get in that 60-degree range, it's hard to beat a floating worm or a finesse worm, trick worm. Bubblegum pink's always a really good color, and I like to wacky rig it. I just run a weightless hook through the midsection of the worm and just cover water. If I'm in a boat, I'm usually going to get about 5 to 10 feet out from the bank if I can, and parallel that bank and just start working it back real slow, do like a little twitch, let it sink, twitch, let it sink. Also, another good bait covering water right now, jerk bait. Spinner baits, once we warm up in the higher 60s, buzz baits work really well. That's the best thing about the spawn and right before and right after is whatever kind of bait you like to throw, you've got a very good chance of catching fish on it. Where else are we at, Bo? What else are we thinking?
Let's see. We'll go ahead and take a couple of these questions right quick.
Okay.
I know we got 2 in. There's a question there that says, what about walleye and the spot on that? It wasn't one of our target species we was planning on talking about tonight, but I can tell you walleye will start spawning a lot of times before the white bass will. You're talking about 48 to 50-degree water is when they like to spawn, and they'll do a lot like the white bass. They'll head to shallower water, and you'll catch them migrating up these tributaries out of some of these major lakes and rivers and stuff like that as well. Staging for them prior to that temperature, I mean, you're talking late February is whenever the prime is. Right now, they're probably still in those areas looking to reproduce. Baits, spoons has always been a popular deal. Curly-tail grubs, minnow fishing. I mean, you name it. Walleye are some pretty aggressive feeders and predators when it comes time to eat. And they are some pretty good table fare. Fishing after the spawn, post spawn, I can tell you that whenever they get spawned and they're out of off their beds, they're heading right back out to that deeper water. You're going to be looking for drop offs and stuff like that on some of these bigger core lakes where we have them at, and even down in the rivers that we have them in, the Saline River, the White River, and what have you. You want to start looking for the channel, and right there where that channel starts meeting a little bit shallower, and fishing along those ledges. Walleye's eyesight might be a little bit better than some of the other fish, so you want to do a little distance fishing on them as well. So as far as tips go. White bass is another question. What size minnows are best? Most of my white bass fishing, like I said, I use small plastics for that most of the time. Just a simple cast and a slow retrieve with occasional pause. If I was going to use minnows, though, and I were looking for a better size for them, if I'm using 2.5, 3-inch long grubs, I'm thinking probably about a number 4, number 6 minnow right in there. The thing of it is, though, like I said before, and it's much like Will saying with the largemouth, you're not really getting a hunger bite strike out of them. You're invading territory where they're looking to reproduce. When you're catching those white bass, they're simply biting it to protect their offspring and what have you. So,
Bo, I would say on the minnows, like I say, it's not hunger, but 6 is a good size. So, a huge fish will eat a small bait, but a medium fish might not eat a huge bait or at that particular day. But not to talk down anybody, but it does make a difference how you hook them a lot of times. And if you're casting and dragging them back in and out, hooking them in the lips, like from the bottom up where they're kind of streamlined with the water some, and it's not pulling against them, they'll live a little longer. If I'm just going to throw one out and let it set, I really like to hook it in the back.
Or hook it right there below that dorsal fin where you got a little bit more pull on it.
Around, but they'll bite a plastic. A lot of times they'll bite a plastic bait or something like Will said that doesn't even look natural, but they will not bite a dead minnow. A lot. Sometimes they will, but when it's just laying out there and it looks it's a natural thing that looks unnatural or it looks dead and not in the right spot, that's a turn off for them a lot of times. So just keep track of how your minnows are doing and where you hook them at.
That's the thing. I mean, with crappie especially, they get finicky. They want it to look just so. If you're jig fishing for them and that jig, you're tying a tight knot and that jig gets turned to where it's sitting vertical, not horizontal, they won't hit. I mean, they don't want it hanging like it's limp and dead. They want it up on its side.
I've even got lazy before and not paid attention, but all your jigs, the eye's on one side of it. And that's, you tie them like this and then they're upside down. Well, you always think about them. And so, if you don't hook that hook in the bottom of their lip and come through the top, if you just hook them any random way, that minnow might be sideways or upside down even in the water. So it's important to kind of think about how your bait's oriented and your hook and where the knot's at, like you're talking about, just to make it look as natural. And I've caught fish with jigs. I've caught them with minnows on the jigs, but when I've thrown it all for a while and I know that minnow's probably dead, I've done better when I take it off.
Take it off, either put a fresh one on or just don't put one on at all.
Or we were in I did go to Lake Conway about a month ago or a little longer, and there was so much, Gold Creek, everybody was in there. You could jump from boat to boat, but there was so much bait in there that they bit better on just a wild looking artificial than they would a minnow, because the minnow didn't match all the shad that were in there, I guess, and it just looked out of place.
That's something a lot of people don't look to as well, is matching what's there that they naturally eat and what they're naturally finding in that body of water. I've gone to the point where if I'm fishing a shad shaped bait for largemouth during their spawn, if I see the shad have an eye spot on the tail, break out a paint pen, put an eye spot on the back side of your bait. Or if they've got that fine line coming up along the lateral line, a dark line, paint that on there just to make it match a little bit closer. Fish do not have the great eyesight at a distance, but they can see well up close to the point that they see color better than we do even. So they notice these little subtle differences like that. Water temperature is another spot where the fish tend to get picky. I've not noticed it so much on white bass, but on the crappie and on the black bass family, you get a cool rain in amongst a warm water day, and you've pushed a lot of those fish that haven't already laid their eggs back off the bed because the temperature's not right for them. Late November, I love to go out and catch crappie on a false spawn. That photo period, the amount of light versus dark, that temperature is coming back down to hit that prime target temperature, and they'll be up on the same beds they were on during the spring spawn. But a lot of times that temperature don't stay there long enough, nor does the photo period stay there long enough to get them to actually reproduce. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that you can watch, and every time that matches up with all these species of fish, you can go back out and find them in those same locations, those same haunts you found them in spring later on in the year.
What do you guys think about, we've had a bunch of rain lately, and some of this water will get up and out of the banks where it normally is. Will they move into that new shallow water to spawn? But then when it starts falling out, don't they know, they kind of can feel that and they want to move back a little deeper, or how's that affect?
During this heavy rain springs like this, we won't have a lot of times as good a hatch on some of these species because, especially on bodies of water where water levels are regulated pretty heavy, the water level will come up, water temperature will be right, photo period's right. Those fish will go into those areas, spawn, lay their eggs, fertilize them, and if they're not, those eggs don't hatch within a week, and that water be up during that time, those eggs will sit and go dry if it's down in just a day or two. Yeah, I mean, that has a lot to do with it as well. I don't know if y'all remember the year when it rained so much that picnic tables up on Greer's Ferry were underwater. I'm talking about the tops of the picnic tables. And water stayed so high so long, we actually had a pretty good hatch up there that year. But that's because there was so much more new structure and so much more insects introduced into the water at that time.
I actually caught fish off those picnic tables on Greer's that year.
Yeah.
Yep. That was a good year.
All right, Bo, we got another question. What is the best time of day to fish for newbies? Do you fish these species very early, very late, hot day before the storm? Any significance in that?
Day before the storm can usually be a hot time. If you know it's going to rain and the crappie are on bed, I'd get up there before they started vacating. They're not going to vacate until that water starts getting rough and the cooler water starts feeding in. Same way with the largemouth that I've caught. They may be there right before the storm, but right after they're going to be vacating out for a little while. Time of day, well, Matt, I don't know if y'all agree with me or not, but for a newbie during these spawning times, you can go there just about any time of the day and catch it.
I agree. That's one of the best things about the spawn is, I mean, they're willing and ready to eat all the time. And I mean, you don't have to be out there at the crack of dawn or right at the end of the day. Really, we have so much with weather-wise going on. I like it later in the afternoon after it's warmed up because usually we'll get that water temp just a little warmer and it will make the fish a little more active. But, I mean, if you've had a warmer night, let's say high 50s, low mid 60s, early morning's going to be just fine too. But it's a great time because you can catch them all times of the day.
Matt, anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with y'all. I like going early in the morning just out of habit, but that way, if it's not happening, you go do something different or switch spots or that kind of thing sometimes. But yeah, I've caught them. I've had my headlights pointing at the water and throwing my bobber out there in front of them just because on into the evening, when they're biting. But I would say the water temp, like Will was saying, being warmer as it warms through the day, right at probably the first part of the spawn, you'd be better off later in the day, especially, we think about it, past couple of days been nice, warm and pretty, and you think it's time to go, but while we're sleeping at night, it's getting down to 40 degrees, and that water cools back off, and it takes it a while to get back going the next day. So.
Okay, what is a good depth to look for black bass during the spawn?
Well, you're a black bass man.
All right. It's going to be relative. It's always going to be relative to where you're fishing for the most part. Some lakes may not be more than 8 foot in depth. Some of them may get to 100 feet deep. But really, during the spawn, you can find fish in 2 to 3 foot of water on almost any body of water. I've caught them in less than a foot of water a lot of times. So you look for that 2 foot range for bass. You should be able to find them once that water gets right and they're spawning. I'm gonna go ahead and take this moon phase one while we're at it.
Okay.
Yes, moon phase 100% I think affects it. And I meant to mention it in the bass part earlier. I think it really kicks off the spawn. They're all in full spawn mode around the full moon in April. There's some that are going to spawn now. There's some that are going to spawn later, but that full moon in April to me is kind of like the dogwoods and the Bradford pairs to the crappie anglers and white bass. That's when I really think about the spawn for bass.
Will, you guys will know more about there's a question about bank fishing on tips at Conway for crappie, but the one thing bank fishing in general, I'd say, those saying when you're on the bank, you throw it as far as you can out. And when you're in the boat, you throw it at the bank, can't be happy. I guess grass is always greener, but don't be tempted to cast too far out on the bank when they're spawning for anything, but especially crappie. Like you said, I've caught some fish in some water that I didn't think a crappie could swim straight up and down in. It was so shallow. I was surprised that they even got there, but I've even just drug the bait right at the top of the water, not 6-8 inches from the bank and had them attack it. So I don't know the specific public, places to bank fish at Conway, but I would say don't be tempted to chunk it out there. They may be really close.
And that's the thing, Matt. There are some great public access points there on Lake Conway around the lake, from where some of the old boat docks where they used to rent boats and motors and what have you have been turned over to game and fish over the years. And getting over and fishing around those areas, find anything looks a little bit unusual, whether it's brush or rocky bottom or what have you. Those crappie will be over there spawning whenever it comes time for them to spawn. I don't look for crappie to really be spawning on Conway. I know Matt was talking about Gold Creek being where you can walk from boat to boat over there back in February, but I'm looking here about another week or two before they really start kicking in good over there when our weather stabilizes a little bit more. I was just looking at that on my phone. Yeah, we're getting up and we're going to maintain some 60-degree temperatures up until next week, until most of next week even. But those lows are getting down into the mid-40s, down to the low 30s even in some of those nights. And that throws that water temperature off a little bit. It's not able to get up and sustain the warmth, and it'll cause these finicky crappie to back off a little bit. The best thing I can tell you on any of them, though, is if you're not catching them right away up on the spawn, keep trying. Because there's going to come a point in time when they're going to do it, whether we're there or not. So you keep trying, keep going back, and eventually you'll find them where they start hitting. If any of y'all like to journal any at all, journal about fishing. Write down what the temperature was that day, what the water temperature was, overcast, sunny, whether the moon phase, anything like that, what bait you used, what depths you fished. That way you can find out when you catch them the best and turn around and use that to help you out in future years in that same body of water.
Okay, any predictions on when the white bass run will kick off on the Lake Maumelle tributaries?
Historically, it's been right there around spring break week, about the next to last week in March is whenever they're hitting good. Once again, our weather's been back and forth a little bit this year. as far as cool, warm, cool, warm. I would do them the same way as I was talking about with the crappie. Yeah, we're going to have to hit it and just stay at it until we can find them up in there. I'll be willing to bet, though, this weekend even, you probably find some up inside there, up inside those tributaries, trying to get up in those shoals if it doesn't rain. Any more questions? See, in the deep water lakes such as Greer's, the black bass will move into shallower water, such as 4 or 5 foot deep, to spawn. Is this correct?
That is correct. I've even caught them on Greer's, even shallower than 4 to 5 feet. You will find them a lot in that 4 to 5 foot range, but I have caught them where their backs were almost out of the water as well. But that's a really good lake to fish during the spawn, and Greer's has a lot of fish in it. It's just a fun fish catching lake. Now the smallmouth, though, they will spawn farther out sometimes than the largemouth and spots will. You could find those smallmouth on beds in 20 foot of water, but your largemouth are going to be typically 4 foot or less.
Correct. And same with the spots.
Yep.
Kentucky bass, and when we say spotted bass, that is the Kentucky bass. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Do these fish spawn mostly at the place where the creek enters the lake, or do they move into the creek? It's been my experience that when they're there at that creek mouth, they're either there to feed on what's being washed out, or they're staging to get up inside some of that even shallower water to do their spawning. Well, Matt, y'all agree with that?
I agree. A lot of times I'm going to look, and since we were talking about Greer's, let's just take Greer's for example. I'm going to start running up the creeks to find spawning fish. I'm going to go farther up. I'm going to find clearer water, and that's where I'm going to fish because that's where the fish are going. There'll also be some that will spawn on main lake points, but a lot of them are going to run up the rivers. And then like right now, you're going to be catching a lot of them in the creek mouth because they're getting ready to go that way. What are your thoughts, Matt?
I would agree with you there. And I don't fish it a lot, but just when people say creeks as well, though, like those creeks on Gridge Ferry, they're not like flowing. They're not like you think about a creek running through a field and that water flowing like a little tributary. They're just, they once were, I guess, and maybe they do to an extent, but those fish want to go up into that new water or that water, but I'm thinking maybe like some other lakes, or maybe an oxbow with a river going by, or maybe something else. That they don't want to be in moving water necessarily to lay their eggs, or else they get relocated, I guess. So if that's what you mean on a creek, as far as going up into some of those, traditional, like we think about at Greer's Ferry, I'd say for sure. But somewhere I'm thinking like maybe on White River where you have creeks coming in and water's dumping into them, that's really moving. Maybe not so much, but.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right, then.
Just ready to go fishing, man.
I hear you. Are rocks a good spawning location? If rocks of water is available, yes. Not everything requires vegetation. And again, not one of our target species, but fishing Greer's Ferry, if I'm going up there looking to catch bluegill, I'm looking for some fine rocks, fine gravel down there, and you'll actually see the little honeycomb beds down there. Bass ain't much different when it comes to that. You can find their beds down there. It's like it was said earlier. The males go in, they kind of clean out the nest site and let the female come in to lay her eggs. And you'll find them in there a lot of times around those rocks. And yes, Rick, he's saying looking for some slow water, not with no current, but with little current when it comes to fishing these feeder creeks and stuff like that around through there. That's where you'll find them more often. And Leonard, I don't think there's anybody on this panel that could tell you how do I catch them guaranteed.
Called fishing, man.
That's right. It's not called catching, is it, guys? All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate y'all coming out tonight and sitting with us and talk a little bit of fishing. I hope you learned some. Miss Tara will wind up taking the recording and working it up and getting it sent out to everybody so you can rewatch it in case there's anything you missed. Also, if you want to save the chat, you can go over here to the side of the chat. You'll see a little three-dot menu there along the chat. You can turn around, click on it, and it says save chat. You can click on that, and they'll save it to a file on your computer or on your phone. Once again, thanks for showing up. Matt, Will, thanks for sitting in with us and talking fishing tonight. And I hope everybody has a great time out there this year catching a few fish during the spawn.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Yes, sir.